Shalom, I'm Officer Jadiel with Israel United in Christ, and we're here to show you Afro-Arabians, you Afro-Lebanese, that you are the people of the Bible. Throughout history, there's been a concentrated attempt and a crafty counsel done to hide who you are. It's been done intentionally to make sure that the people of Arabia, right, the people of Lebanon do not know that they are the Israelites. You're on the bottom of society because you've sinned against God. Let's go to Job chapter 9 and verse 24. Let's start there. The book of Job, chapter 9 and verse 24. The earth is given unto the hand of the wicked. He covereth the faces of the judges thereof. If not, where and who is he? When we read in the Bible, the wicked have covered the faces of the judges, the true Israelites. They've taken the history away. They've taken it out of your school system and out of your school books and told you that you're never oppressed. And they try to hide that, although in daily reality, you face that slavery and oppression. What I want to start with is I want to show you the founding of Lebanon, because the whole title of the class is to show you what? That slavery has existed throughout time in Lebanon. So we're going to read this real quick. It says Lebanon, officially the Republic of Lebanon, is a country in the Levant region of West Asia. It is bordered by Syria to the north and east, by Israel to the south, and by the Mediterranean Sea to the west. Cyprus lies a short distance away from the country's coastline. Lebanon is located at the crossroads of the Mediterranean Basin and Arabian hinterlands. Lebanon has a population of more than 5 million people and covers an area of 10,452 square kilometers. Beirut is the capital and largest city. All right, so history. It says the borders of contemporary Lebanon are a product of the Treaty of Sevres of 1920. Its territory was in the core of the Bronze Age Canaanite Phoenician city-states. As part of the Levant, it was part of numerous succeeding empires throughout ancient history, including the Egyptian, Assyrian, Babylonian, Achaemenid, Hellenistic, Sasanian, and Roman empires, right? So when you read about Lebanon, most times you'll see that it was founded in 1920. You also see 1940 as a date that's used, 1944 to be exact, right? So let's go to the Bible. Let's see if Lebanon as the country dictates the history, because what we got to do is go to the Bible. We'll see that this place has been mentioned for a very long time. Right, let's go to Genesis chapter 49 and let's read verse 13. It says, Zebulun shall dwell at the haven of the sea, and he shall be for a haven of ships, and his border shall be unto Zidon. So when you look in the Bible, you see Zidon is mentioned as a place where the children of Israel would dwell. Zebulun's borders would be down to Zidon. So let's look at what modern day Zidon would be called. Let's pull that up. If you look at this link, it says Tyre and Sidon, or you see S instead of a Z, right? Sidon and Zidon, same thing, are ancient cities in Phoenicia that are now located in Lebanon. It shows you that Tyre is to the north, and then you also see that Zidon is a part of Lebanon as well. Both of these cities are in Lebanon, what you would call modern day Lebanon. So when you read the Bible and you see Tyre and Zidon, what it's referring to is Lebanon. So you understand, right? Those are the same thing. So we're going to go to Deuteronomy chapter 1 and verse 1, right? Why is this extremely important for you to know? Deuteronomy 1 and verse 1. It said, These be the words which Moses spake unto all Israel on this side Jordan and the wilderness, and the plain over against the Red Sea, between Paran and Tophel, and Laban and Hazarah and Disabba. So the reason I'm reading that is to show you what? The book of Deuteronomy was given to the Israelites. Now, when you jump over to Deuteronomy chapter 27, we're going to read verse 1 there. The same group is being identified and talked to by Moses. Deuteronomy 27 and verse 1. It says, And Moses, with the elders of Israel, commanded the people, saying, Keep all the commandments which I command you this day. So Moses was talking to the elders of the nation of Israel. The Bible is about a nation of people known as the Israelites. Now, let's read chapter 28 and read verse 15. But it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. The children of Israel have been oppressed. Why? Because they've broken the commandments of God. But what many scholars or what many people do not know is that the Israelites are you Afro-Lebanese, you Afro-Arabians. You have broken the commandments of God, and for that you have been constantly oppressed and cursed in this earth. You may think that your society just started slavery, or that slavery doesn't tie back to your history, but what we want to show you today is that you've been oppressed throughout time. Regardless of who the empire was that reigned over Lebanon, you've been on the bottom of it. And we want to show you some examples of that. Now let's jump up to verse 25. Let's read something first. This is one of the curses God said would happen to the Israelites. Verse 25. It said, the Lord shall cause thee to be smitten before thine enemies. Thou shalt go out one way against them, and flee 7 ways before them, and shall be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth. So the Lord said, if the Israelites broke his commandments, they would be scattered, and they would be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth. Right? What I want to look up is the word diaspora. You may say, why do we want to look up the word diaspora? Let's pull this up. We're going to look at the definition, and we're going to read a little bit on the history of the word diaspora. The settling of scattered communities of Jews outside ancient Palestine after the Babylonian exile. So when we read the Bible, you see that the Israelites, they went into captivity in Babylon, and then they were scattered, right? They were scattered to different places. They went into many different captivities, the Greeks, the Romans, all the way up to today. So when the word was originally used, let's see why it was used. It says, until recently, diaspora was thought to be a fairly new word in English to describe a very old thing. Its first and principal meaning relates to the settling of the Jewish people outside of Palestine after the Babylonian exile thousands of years ago. Watch this now. It says, however, recent research has found that the word is quite a bit older than previously thought. It can be found as far back as 1594 in a translation of Lambert de News, a fruitful commentary upon the 12 small prophets. The place you find the 12 small prophets is in the Bible, right? It says, this scattering abroad of the Jews, as it were in heavily sowing, fell out after the return from the captivity of Babylon. They are called diaspora. That is a scattering or sowing abroad. So the Israelites were scattered and sown abroad. Why? Because they broke God's commandments. They were known as the diaspora. No one else was known as the diaspora throughout history. But going back to what we read in the beginning, Job chapter 9 and verse 24, there's been an effort, a crafty counsel and a secret plot to take that word and change the meaning so that you don't associate yourself to the people of the Bible. It says, reading on, it says diaspora is descended from the Greek word diasporin, meaning to scatter, spread abroad. So the Israelites have been spread abroad throughout the entire earth. That's how we know you Afro-Lebanese are the Israelites. Why? Because you've been scattered to a land through slavery. You know you descend from slavery, but you can't tell your history. You can't give the specifics. And that's what we're here to show you. The specifics I found in the Bible. And then once you read the Bible, you compare that history with the Bible and get clarity on who you are. Let's jump down to verse 33 now. Let's read that. Deuteronomy chapter 20 and verse 33. It says, the fruit of thy land and all thy labor shall a nation which thou knowest not eat up, and thou shalt be only oppressed and crushed always. So what we have to be able to see is that throughout time, the Israelites have been oppressed. They were oppressed in the Bible when they broke God's commandments, because this Deuteronomy 28 verse 15 applied to biblical times as much as it does today. This is the book of Judges, chapter 10 and verse 12, right? What I want to show you is that throughout history, the Israelites were oppressed when they broke God's commandments. They were actually oppressed in modern day Lebanon back in time, right? In the Bible. Judges chapter 10, and let's read verse 12. It says, the Zidonians, which were Africans at that time, also, and the Amalekites, which are the fake Jews that you see in Israel today, the Amalekites oppressed us, and the Maonites did oppress you. Those are the Arabians. Those 3 same groups are oppressing your people in Lebanon today. They did oppress you back then, and still today they oppress you. Why? Because we've broken the commandments of God. It says, and you cried to me, and I deliver you out of their hand. So what we have to understand in this time is just like then, the only way out of the solution is to cry unto God, to return to being the Israelites, repent, and keep God's commandments. That's what we have not learned in society. What we learn in society is that there's another way out, that you can go into Islam, or that you can raise money, or that you'll be able to fight back, and none of those things have worked for the children of Israel. What worked in old times will work in this current time if we learn it. Let me get the video. Let's show our sister, and let's see the oppression that she's facing, because the Bible says she will only be oppressed. Let's see if things have gotten better in Lebanon, or that slavery doesn't exist and oppression doesn't exist. Let's play this video.
عندكم مشكلة مع لوني؟ هيدا خلقة الله. انتوا هيك صارت مشكلتكم مع الله مباشرة. منكم لله اصطفلوا. أنا سودانية، مصرية، لبنانية. تلغوا تاريخ الناس والصحافة وبخفة هيك منصير خونة وعملاء وبلا قضية. مين حطكم مسؤولين عن دائرة الجنسيات والجوازات والهويات الوطنية؟ انتوا بارزوني بالأخلاق والحجة والأسباب، مش بلوني. مش مضطرة أعطيكم نماذج وأمثال عن ثوار وقياديين وتغييرين من هاللون بدلوا بحياة الدول وغيروا قوانين وأحكام، حرروا بلاد على فكرة، وانتوا هون قاعدين بتنتظروا إذا الزعيم بيسمح لكم تنزلوا على الشارع بس تقولوا
So the sister spoke out against oppression. She spoke on Hezbollah, and then when she mentioned it, they started to take things away from her and label her a certain way. And it shows you the oppression that's written about in Deuteronomy 28 still exists. You don't have the ability to speak freely. You don't have the ability to live in a country and not be ridiculed or have your history changed. Even she mentioned that. Or your passport taken away. Things like the kafala system still exist. And why? Because of Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 46. God said it. Let's read it. It's the book of Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 46. And they, meaning the curses that we're reading about you being scattered and only oppressed, shall be upon thee for a sign and for a wonder, and upon thy seed forever. The words forever mean slavery in the region of Lebanon will exist for the children of Israel forever. The only way to be saved is just like when we read in the time of Judges. You have to come back and keep the commandments of God. When you don't, there is no solution. There is no way out. We can protest, we can rise up and say whatever we want, but the reason we're in that position is because we broke the commandments of God, and God said he's going to keep the oppression upon us forever. It's the book of Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 32. Let's see if the history that we're going to read lines up with the Bible. Deuteronomy 28 verse 32, it says, Thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto another people, and thine eyes shall look and fare with longing for them all the day long, and there shall be no might in thine hand. Our sons and our daughters have been taken through slavery throughout history. There's many slave trades that we're going to read about that have happened in the region of Lebanon, where the people have been taken through the Indian Ocean slave trade, through the Red Sea slave trade, through the Trans-Saharan slave trade. All of those slave trades have happened in the region. But when Lebanon was founded in the 1920s, 1940s, they act as if slavery is not a big part of the history of that region, as if Beirut was not a slave market. The capital of Lebanon was a slave market. These things are not mentioned. Why? Because there's an effort to hide who you are, that your sons and daughters have been taken through the Bible, right? And that God said it would happen to the Israelites. Verse 33, it says, The fruit of thy land and all thy labors shall a nation which thou knowest not eat up, and thou shalt be only oppressed and crushed always. So now let's read the history and see if that lines up with what the Bible actually says about the children of Israel. Let's go through this. So let's start with slavery in Lebanon. Slavery in Lebanon. It says slavery existed in the territory of modern Lebanon until the 20th century. It was formally abolished by the French in 1931. Many members of the Afro-Arabian minority are descendants of the former slaves. So it's known, you can go on Wikipedia, it's out in the open, that the Afro-Arabians are descendants of the slaves. We read the Bible. We read who will be scattered into all countries. We read whose sons and daughters will be taken. Let's scroll down and look at the history of Lebanon. It says, historically, the institution of slavery in the region of later Lebanon was reflected in the institution of slavery in the Rashidun Caliphate, slavery in the Umayyad Caliphate, slavery in the Abbasid Caliphate, slavery in the Mamluk Sultanate, and finally slavery in the Ottoman Empire. So all it's telling you is you were enslaved by different groups of Arabians or Arabs over time. Over time. You were constantly taken to slavery. No matter who was there and who was ruling, they said, we're going to make sure that slavery exists. It didn't end. And the reason that it went on forever is because you kept breaking the commandments of God. Even today, as you worship Allah and you follow the traditions of Islam, you go against your God that is found in the Bible. Let's keep reading. Ottoman Lebanon. It says Ottoman Lebanon belonged to the Ottoman Empire in 1516 through 1920. African slaves were imported from the Red Sea slave trade via Damascus and from the Trans-Saharan slave trade via Egypt. There were also a small import of Caucasian, mostly circumcision women for the rich. Eunuch boys and female slaves were used for domestic service and private households. So let's look at the Red Sea slave trade. Let's look at that. The Red Sea slave trade is not widely talked about, but let's figure out who were they taking in the Red Sea slave trade. This is interesting. It says the Red Sea slave trade, sometimes known as the Islamic slave trade, Arab slave trade, or Oriental slave trade, was the slave trade across the Red Sea, trafficking Africans from the African continent to slavery in the Arabian Peninsula and Middle East from antiquity until the mid-20th century. The Red Sea slave trade is known as the longest enduring slave trades in the world. It's known as one of the longest enduring slave trades in the world, as it is known to have existed from ancient times until the 1960s, when slavery in Saudi Arabia and slavery in Yemen was finally abolished. Let's scroll down a little bit. Now, right there, the last paragraph. It says, the Red Sea slave trade was together with the Trans-Saharan slave trade and Indian Ocean slave trade, one of the arenas compromising what has been called the Islamic slave trade, Oriental slave trade, or Arab slave trade of enslaved people from East Africa to the Muslim world. Now let's pull up that book we have, right? Let's look at East African societies. Let's see who were they taking from Eastern Africa. Who were they enslaving from Eastern Africa? This is East African societies. Let's look at this book. It says, Seligman proposed 3 pure races, the Hamite, the Bushman, and the Negro. Now let's jump down. It says the mixture of the Negro and Hamite, in which Negro predominated, produced the Bantu. The Bantu, that's important to remember. The mixture of Negro and Hamite, in which the Hamite predominated, produced the Nilo from the Nile Valley region. Finally, the mixture of the Nilo and the Hamite produced the Nilo-Hamite or half-Hamite, the term given to a number of pastoral or semi-pastoral peoples in East Africa. So what they know is that the Negro, like the Negro in America, was different from the Nilotes. So now let's go back to this and let's read more in this article, because they identify something very clear about who was being taken. It says East Africa came to act as a supply source for slaves to the Arabian Peninsula via the Indian Ocean slave trade since at least the Middle Ages. While the majority of these slaves appear to have been shipped to the Arabian Peninsula via Oman and Muscat rather than the Red Sea was also a route for the slave trade between East Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. It also acted as a slave route for Egypt. In the 12th century, Muhammad al-Idrisi trafficked African children from present-day Kenya to Arabia. So when we read that, what we have to see is they intentionally took people from the east of Africa. We see that those people that were being taken from the east of Africa were the Bantu. They were being taken as slaves. Why? Because they are the Israelites. They are the Israelites of the Bible, and they broke God's commandments, and due to that, the Lord said, you are going to be only oppressed, and your sons and daughters will be taken by another nation that you knew not. So let's look at the dhows that they used to transport the slaves. This was a type of slave ship that was being used. Let's look at this. This was the ship that was being used to transport the slaves. These are examples that we're looking at now. There were sailed ships that they moved the slaves on, right? So the oppression also happened over there, right? In the east of Africa, and they took them into Lebanon. Also, let's look at the people taken on those boats. You see here some images of the people taken. They look like the Negro in America today. They look like the Afro-Arabians. They look like the Afro-Lebanese. They also look like the Afro-Syrian or the Afro-Jordanian. Why? Because the people of that region were oppressed. They were being enslaved and transported all around the region because they are the Israelites according to the Bible. So we're going to read some history on the dhows, right? Let's look at how the dhows were used throughout history. It says dhows were extensively used for the Red Sea slave trade and the Indian Ocean slave trade, which the Royal Navy attempted to suppress. In his 1873 book, Captain G.L. Sullivan described 4 different kinds of casting dhows, as shown in the engravings, viz. The Batil, the Badane, Bulgala, and genuine dhow, and the Matapa boat. What I want you to see here is that there was a design effort to suppress the history of what a dhow was actually used for. A dhow was used to enslave the people that were there, the Israelites, the Negroes, the Bantu. So now we're going to look at slavery in the Ottoman Empire, because as we read earlier, the Ottoman Empire also ruled over the Israelites. So let's look at slavery in the Ottoman Empire, and let's look at who was being taken into slavery under the Ottoman Empire. Because remember, from 1920 backwards, the Ottoman Empire was in power. This is what we're reading in the Bible, that you will be only oppressed. So let's start from the top. It says slavery in the Ottoman Empire was a major institution and a significant part of the Ottoman Empire's economy and traditional society. The main sources of slaves were wars and politically organized enslavements, expeditions in the Caucasus, Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, Central Europe, Southeast Europe, the Western Mediterranean, and Africa. So now let's go down to some of the history. Slaves were transported to the Ottoman Empire via several different routes, targeting different supply sources. The Ottoman Empire focused on three main slave trade routes: white slaves from the Balkans used for military service, black slaves imported from Africa, often from Sudan via Egypt, and white slaves imported via the Black Sea and Caucasus. Africa was a major target supply of slaves for the Ottoman Empire. The Africans were largely pagans and hence were viewed as legitimate targets of slavery by Islamic law. Slaves were trafficked to the Ottoman Empire via three main routes: the Trans-Saharan slave trade via Egypt and Libya, the Red Sea slave trade across the Red Sea, and the Indian Ocean slave trade from East Africa via the Indian Ocean and the Arabian Peninsula. These slave routes were all inherited from the previous Muslim empire. So what we see here is that each Muslim empire just took our people into slavery over and over and over again. Let's see what they took into slavery. Indian Ocean slave trade. It says, as there were restrictions on the enslavement of Muslims and people of the book, Jews and Christians living under Muslim rule, pagan areas in Africa became a popular source of slaves, known as the Zanj, Bantu. These slaves originated mainly from the African Great Lakes as well as from Central Africa. The Jans were employed in households, on plantations, and in the army as slave soldiers. Some could ascend to become high-rank officials, but in general, Zanj were considered inferior to European and Caucasian slaves. So we lived on the bottom of society. The Zanj are the Bantu. We read about who the Bantu were. The Bantu are the Negroes. They are the people of the Bible. And what has been happening to us over time is we've been continuously oppressed. We've been continuously oppressed. Why? Because we go against our God and we break his commandments. I'm going to read Deuteronomy 28, verse 46. It says, and they, meaning the curses, shall be upon thee for a sign and for a wonder, and upon thy seed forever. So what has happened to us throughout time is we've been oppressed over and over and over again. Why? Because we refuse to come back to our God. We've been oppressed as the Bantu. We are oppressed as the Afro-Lebanese. We're oppressed as the Afro-Arabian. Why? Because we have not learned that we are the true Israelites. Well, what happens if we come back to our God? That's what I want to show you. The reason that we're here. Let's go to Joshua chapter 23 and verse 10. Let's read that. The book of Joshua chapter 23 and verse 10. One man of you shall chase 1,000. For the Lord your God, he it is that fighteth for you, as he hath promised you. Take good heed therefore unto yourselves, that ye love the Lord your God. If we come back to our God and we love him, there's nothing that can hurt us. There's nothing that can be done to the children of Israel. But now that we've gone against our God is fighting against us. So what we want you to do is repent, learn your nationality, come in and keep God's commandments. You can find out more by visiting IsraelUnite.org. Shalom. Most High in Christ.